Green, which is in Forbes magazine, Charles Green said, the world needs leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than trust in power. And since that time in Logica, since I became a coach, I've worked with many leaders who are relying upon the power of trust and who are letting go of trusting in power. And I think that's a really inspiring role, because if we want leaders like that, we need coaches who can help them develop those skills, and we need coaches who are role modeling those trustworthy skills in business. I think I'm having a few little technical gremlins here, so just let James step in. Pardon? Okay, we'll do that. Because let's face it, when you pick up the papers these days, you read a lot about leaders who unfortunately are destroying trust in business around the world. And I've got my own sort of favorite rogues gallery here that I just put together for this session. It changes every time I do this. There are always some new faces, to add. No shortage of fresh material. So who recognizes any of these names? Who can shout out a name there? Blatter, Bob Diamond. So let's talk about Bob, the unacceptable face of banking, Diamond. So here's a man who earned a total of £63 million from Barclays Bank in his time as chief executive, and then loaded it with £290 million of fines from the FSA for their role in rigging the LIBOR interbank lending rate. We mentioned Sepp Blatter. So we saw on our television screens a few weeks ago 7 people being escorted out of a 5-star hotel in Zurich with the blanket over their heads, the blanket of shame. People who are alleged to have been involved in $150 million of bribes for broadcasting rights for the World Cup. So that's Bob Diamond, Sepp Blatter. Who else have we recognized? Philip Clarke. Thank you very much. I thought that was probably the most difficult one. So Philip Clarke is the third one in. Philip Clarke was the ex-chief executive of Tesco, who oversaw that organization in the 3 years when it overstated its profits by £263 million. £263 million. And when that story hit the news, Tesco share price fell 45%. And we've got one remaining leader there, yeah. BP, ex-CEO of BP. Tony, I want my life back, Hayward. So 2010, he was caught making that comment that in the midst of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which led to 11 people dying, 4.9 million barrels of oil being pumped into the Gulf, a man who was earning $1.6 million a year, had a pension pot of $17 million. In the midst of that crisis, he made a throwaway comment to a journalist about, yes, we'd all like this to be over, I'd like my life back. And you can imagine the media furore around that. That disaster has to date cost BP $37.2 billion and is expected to cost a further $18 billion in the coming years. All of this media coverage and all of these high-profile examples have led to a collapse in trust and perceptions of trust. One of the CEOs that I've interviewed as part of this work is a guy called Ben Page. He's the chief executive of the polling company Ipsos Mori. And he said to me, our survey shows that only 29% of the public believe that the people in charge know best, and that this percentage is dropping with each successive generation. Other commentators sum it up, in different ways. The Council for Society and Business says society's trust in corporations and their executives is dismally low, with the crisis in leadership fueled by a relentless media cycle and a growing consumer influence through the global spread of information and viewpoints over the internet. PricewaterhouseCoopers has issued 2 white papers on this topic, both are very interesting reads, and in the one which is titled Trust the Behavioral Challenge, they say PwC's view is that the time has come for a new settlement between business and society, one based on less regulation and more responsibility. Businesses must seek to identify and develop and embed the right culture and behavioral norms that will earn both public trust and business success. This is the journey ahead. Well, that's all very well, but what has it got to do with coaching? You can, I think, take two views on the coaching profession. There are those who think coaching is a great set of skills and techniques and processes that help us improve the time management of our clients or their presentation skills or help them manage their career. And I think it certainly is that. And you can also take a view which I think John Whitmore first inspired me with. I know John has already been name-checked today by Darren Robson. I mean, one of the grand sort of fathers of coaching. And John used this phrase once when I was listening to him many years ago about coaching is bigger than coaching. And like a lot of things John said the first time, you didn't quite understand what he meant. But when you thought about it, you realized that what John was trying to say is that coaching maybe is more than just a profession, a set of skills, a set of techniques. It's maybe a tribe of individuals who have appeared in the business world at a certain time to catalyze a shift in the leadership mindset. Now, not everybody agrees with that view, but certainly I'm in John's camp. I think coaching is bigger than coaching. That's why I want to share this topic with you, because I think coaches have a big role to play in role modeling and catalyzing this shift in behaviors around trust in business. And I hope that the reason you're in this room is that you're willing to step up to that challenge and work in that way. I mean, when I left my last corporate role in Logica, there are a number of people who said to me, John, we don't get it. We just don't get it. You're leaving a very interesting career in leadership to become a coach. And I said, no, you've got it the wrong way around. I'm leaving a very predictable career in management to become a leader. And I do see it as that way. And at the time, I really felt that it was leadership that I was pursuing as much as coaching. And I know we have courses, in the leader as coach. We're all familiar with those courses. But I'd like to see a lot more courses in the coach as leader. How do we step up and be leaders? Because I think a lot of us are. And maybe we need to brush that identity down a bit and say that, we're leading as well as coaching. And as part of what I've learned in my leadership since I became a coach and dedicated myself to coaching 10 years ago, my leadership skills have been transformed. And my leadership, in particular, the leadership skills of the heart and of the spirit have definitely been given a brushing down and a serious workout. And in the midst of all that, trust has been a critical skill that I've had to work on in my role as coach. And I've had to take it to a level that I never had to take it as a leader in corporate business. I'm a PCC coach with the ICF. It's one professional body, and in those core competences, trust is at the heart of that code of competence. And in the same way, the Association of Coaching uses this word, and the EMCC uses this word. So it's a word that's in there at the heart of our competence as coaches. Because when I started my career in business back in 1985, I was a graduate trainee in British Gas, and really I didn't need trust. I didn't need trust to do the line management roles that I was being asked to do at that time. What I felt that I needed was simply authority and intellectual ability. Those are really the two pillars that I experienced in business at that time, and those pillars were supporting this purpose of profit. That really that was the sole focus of business. And Milton Friedman, the economist, I think captured this in his famous quote in 1970 when he said, there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, as long as it stays within the rules of the game. And if that is the game, if it's all about just creating profit, and if that's the sort of narrow purpose that business commits itself to, then I think you can get a heck of a long way with intellectual ability and authority. I mean, not a coincidence that those aspects, came together at that time. So I built the first 13 years of my career really in this world. And you could say that I was relatively successful in that world. And it was what I knew. And I had no reason really to question it. It was my belief system. It was my paradigm. And I operated within it in a fairly logical fashion. But I went on a course when I was 33. I sat in a hotel room in the New Forest with a lady who I later found out was a coach. At the time, we didn't really use that word. I think the course was called Advanced Change Management. But we turned up there. I went with a couple of colleagues. We sat in this room at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. And this lady said, I want you to bring a topic from work, a challenge from work. And we got our challenge. And she said, we're going to sit here in this room for 5 days and work on this topic. I looked at my watch. I thought, well, surely we'd be done by 2 o'clock. It's not really that complicated. And by the end of the first day, I really didn't get it. I didn't understand what on earth was going on. I thought it was a waste of time, and I was within a hair's breadth of leaving that course because it just didn't fit. You see, it just didn't fit into this world. But by the Wednesday afternoon, I had what I now call my red pill moment. Really my world turned upside down at that point in a way that was quite profound and led to everything that I suppose I've done since that time in terms of coaching. But I call it the red pill moment because of the film The Matrix. How many of you have seen the film The Matrix? Yeah, hopefully most of you have seen it. So I'm going to show you a short clip from that film, The Matrix, of the choice that the hero of the film, Neo, is given. And he's given a choice between the red pill or the blue pill. And I just want you to imagine that this is the choice that maybe all of us are facing in different ways as we go through our coaching journey. That's what I call the red pill moment. The moment when you suddenly realize that everything you believed about something was only one way of looking at it. And that there is another way of looking at it. And maybe sometimes we have been led for whatever reasons to look at things in a certain way until we look to challenge that and really reassess and reauthor some of those stories. And I think that red pill moment is happening for more and more people in different ways. It happened for me in terms of that moment of seeing the limits of the sort of command and control mindset and shifting to coaching. But I think it happens now many, many more times as we read these stories about breakdown in trust and we see the truth of some of the abuses of power that we're witnessing. And I call it the red pill of transparency. That transparency is all around us now, and that transparency is like a lightning bolt that is striking this pillar of authority and really breaking this model. And transparency is being catalyzed by a number of different forces that are coming together at the same time. So on the one hand, we have diversity. We heard about diversity this morning, that the more diverse views you get in a boardroom, the more access to the truth you have, or to the different perspectives that enable people to build a rich picture. And sometimes that challenges the existing picture in a very dramatic way. We have globalization, another driver. Again, when we get access to different cultures and we realize that not everybody looks at the world the way we do, we have a similar impact in terms of that red pill moment. And finally, whipping it all up at an ever faster speed is the red pill of technology. That technology all the time is presenting data to us in a way that exposes us to new information, sometimes in a way that affects our view of the world and our view of leadership in a profound way. The quote here from Flametta Borgia: "The endless gathering, manipulating and retrieving of information has created the new transparency imperative. The public's right to know is steadily and inexorably eroding the secret, opaque lives of corporations. The more we know, the more we demand to know, and the more there seems to disclose. The cycle seems endless." The young people who are coming into our workforce have been brought up on the red pill. They didn't know anything about this other alternative. That's their staple diet. And I came across a quote from Bob Moritz, who's the US chair of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he said, when I was coming up, We knew what we were doing, but we didn't ask why we did it. Back then, I would have been astonished that PwC's millennials don't only demand to know the organization's purpose, but are also prepared to leave the firm if that purpose does not align with their own values. So nowadays, with the red pill of transparency, in the absence of knowledge, we assume that something is being deliberately hidden. And this is a fundamental shift because it reveals that it was only deference to authority that was holding the old model together. If we had authority, then people trusted us, because really they had no choice. Yet mistakenly, we then start to confuse authority with trust and think that they're the same thing. But I think as this happens around us, we realize that there's a gap developing. It's a gap that we'll need to fill, and we'll need to help people fill in terms of what are we going to replace that with, that deference to authority, if it's falling away? What are we going to replace it with if it isn't a new level of trustworthiness? The Matrix clip is a little bit heavy and philosophical, so I thought I'd lighten the mood and just show you another clip, which is another story about transparency. The clip I'm going to show you has been watched 15 million times around the globe. It's in the top 10 viral YouTube clips of all time. And when it was produced in the week after it was released, it led to a 10% fall in the share price of a certain airline, costing that company $180 million. And it's called United Breaks Guitars. Some of you may have seen this before.
I flew United Airlines on my way to Nebraska. The plane departed Halifax, connecting in Chicago's O'Hare. While on the ground, a passenger said from the seat behind me, "My God, they're throwing guitars out there." The band and I exchanged a look, best described as terror, at the action on the tarmac, and knowing whose projectiles these would be. So before I left Chicago, I alerted 3 employees who showed complete indifference towards me. United, united, you broke my Taylor guitar. United, united, some big help you are. You broke it, you should fix it. You're liable, just admit it. I should have flown with someone else or gone by car. 'Cause United breaks guitars.
So, even humor now is used. It's part of this, part of the power of one voice. Dave Carroll, who wrote that song, he then published a book in 2012 called United Breaks Guitars: The Power of One Voice in the Age of Social Media, which I think is a really good way of summing up this shift. This shift and the way that transparency is moving power in terms of leadership and how we develop that. So I just wanted to pause briefly at that moment because given you a few thoughts, given you a few stories. I've talked about this temple of profit and how it was held up and what's maybe causing it to falter. And I just wondered if there are any, take maybe a couple of questions at that point just to explore that if we need to before we move on. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And so the point was that on Facebook, a question about are corporations, are they viable any longer? Well, I think corporations like this one on the left that rely upon that, if that's how we define a corporation, then I think the viability of that is there's a shelf life on that. It's not to say that there aren't organizations running that way and there won't be for some time, but it's a question of where's the trend moving. So I think we probably have to redefine what we mean by corporation. But the word corporation probably sums up for a lot of people this type of thinking. Just take one more question here. Right. What was the name again? Oh, yes, and he's got a book, hasn't he, I think, called Reinventing Organizations. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, so self-management is one of the things that would have to appear in reaction to this. But then you have to ask yourself, what is the glue that's going to hold all this self-management together? Because self-management in its own way could be quite fragmented. And I think that's where trust is like a glue. But we're going to have to go to sort of the super glue level of trust rather than the Bostic level of trust if we're really going to make that work. Thank you. Yeah, so it's one thing to sort of see that a model is breaking down and to sort of notice that. It's another thing to then think, okay, what is our response to that? And this is where we're sort of getting into in that conversation is that, what is the glue? And we think about trust, and it's a word that we use a lot. We use it in daily conversations. One of the things that I've been challenged by in terms of my research on this and doing it in an academic institution is that you get challenged all the time in terms of, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by trust? How do you define it? What are its characteristics? And you find that trust is a bit like a slippery bar of soap, that it's a word we use a heck of a lot, but not often do we put the microscope on it in terms of really understanding what it means. One of the oldest gestures of trust in our society is the handshake. So if I come down to the front row here and shake Jerry's hand. Jerry, nice to meet you. I've shaken your hand. Do you trust me now? Why don't you trust me? I shook your hand. I'm a nice bloke.
I'm sure that I don't know you.
You don't know me.
I don't have any experience of how you really behave.
Yes. Yes, so you don't know me. So if you'd known me for 12 months and I'd behaved well, would you trust me then?
If you behave well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a little ambiguous.
Yeah.
What do you mean by behave well?
Yeah.
What do I mean by behave well?
Exactly. So this is the conversation you get into very quickly when you start to really pin down and try to nail down trust, because there's a relationship in which Jerry will come with one view of what trust means for her. I'll come with another view. And as well as the trust is literally a psychological sort of state that we will choose to adopt or not adopt at some point. But really what's going on is a dance between my trustworthiness and Jerry's propensity to trust. So we're all going to have different degrees of willingness to offer trust based on our story and our narrative and our experiences. And we're equally all going to have different degrees of demonstrating trustworthy behavior. So, if I'd been in the playground when I was 5 years old and people kept stealing my sweets, I'd probably maybe have a low propensity to trust. And I might meet exactly the same person as Jerry, and I might say, well, I really trust him. And Jerry might say, well, I don't. The behaviors have been exactly the same. So what we realize when we shine the light on trust a bit more is that it's a dance that's going on all the time between trustworthiness and trust. And it's very contextual. So that quote of Mayer, trust them to do what? When, where, and in what context? And if I'm going to have heart surgery in the hospital, I want to trust the doctor. I want to trust that they're competent. I maybe don't need to worry too much about, their long-term integrity, but I want to know that they're competent to do that particular job. But in the ideal case, you trust someone because they are trustworthy, and their trustworthiness inspires trust. And I think this is valuable for me in terms of breaking this down, because as coaches and as leaders, if you recall Covey's sphere of influence and sphere of concern, trustworthiness is in our sphere of influence. But trust is really in our sphere of concern. I can't compel someone to trust me. But what I can do is take responsibility for the trustworthiness of my behaviors. And for me, that's a valuable sort of empowering shift, that my job is to focus on the trustworthiness of my behaviors. And through that, I maximize the potential for trust in my relationships and hopefully inspire that likelihood. But, we can't demand trust, but we can demonstrate our own trustworthiness. And over time, use that as our way of contributing to this challenge. So I'm going to try a bit of new technology here. We're going to be at the bleeding edge, and we've just bled. We've just bled. Whilst we're going to get this working, but what this is, I saw this used 2-3 weeks ago for the first time, and I thought I'm going to give that a go because that's pretty cool. If it doesn't work, you can call me a smart-ass. But what I want to do is do a quick poll in the room. Most of the times, I don't want you to get your mobile phones out when I'm presenting, but I'd like you to get your mobile phones out, and I'd like you to. Those of you who've got text in, which I imagine is most of you, I'd like you to send a text to the number that's on the screen. So I'd like you to send a text that says John Blakey 214. It doesn't matter whether it's uppercase or lowercase. Just send the text John Blakey 214 to the number 0203 322 5822. So if you send the text, I've lost it. So we're back. Send the phrase John Blakey 214 to the number 0203 322 5822. And when you do that, you should get a message back that just says you're now in a poll. You've now been accepted into a poll. Yeah, the number is 0203. Here we go. It's coming back. The number is 0203 322 5822. 0203 322 5822. So hopefully you've all texted the message John Blakey 214 to that number. And when you do that, you should get a response back that says you're now admitted into a poll. Yeah? Is that working? Yeah? Yeah? So what you've been admitted to there is a poll, and really I want you to now text to that same number your answer to this question. And the question is, what is the most important characteristic of a person's trustworthiness? So I'd like to know from you, if you were judging someone's trustworthiness, what is the quality and characteristic you would think is most important to see in the behavior of that person? And you basically have one word. If you just send one word, and as you send it, we'll see those responses appearing on the screen, and it will build as a sort of word map of your view of what trustworthiness is. Just type a word in and send it. Yeah. What's the most important characteristic of trustworthiness? I could have done this on a flip chart, but, you know. And the more responses we get for a certain word, then, you know, this is going to build as a map of it. The larger the text, the more often that characteristic is being referred to and voted for by yourself. If you want to put a second one in there, then put a second one in. Let's just build this and see what words we start seeing come into the forefront. So our top three at the moment: integrity, reliability, and honesty. We've got other words around the edge there: consistency, commitment, strength, eye contact, I think, is in there, communication, humanity, confidentiality, competent, listens, openness. So that's what trustworthiness means to the people in this room. That's your sort of view of what you're looking for if you're going to trust someone, and therefore what hopefully you want to represent to others. James, I think I need you full time here, but what I want to thank you for just being involved with that. What I want to just move on, let's have a look at. I need the next slide, please. Yeah, that one. If you text leave now to that same number, it will get you out of the poll. I mean, nothing's going to happen if you stay in there for that matter, but if you text leave, it will get you out of the poll. It's a bit of software called Polev, if anybody wants to check that out, POLLEV.com. If anybody wants to look at how you use that. It's really, really neat sort of tool for just getting an instant response from an audience. So that was your view of trustworthiness. There are academic researchers that have been working on this topic for years and years, and they have had their own views. And they have written many peer-reviewed papers about what exactly this trustworthiness constitutes. And the three words that they have come up with, which have been summarized by a researcher called Burke, are ability, integrity, and benevolence. So I think you had the integrity word there. That was shining through quite strongly, and probably it's a word we're all familiar with. But interestingly, there are three equal pillars, and they're felt to have equal importance, that as well as integrity, we want ability, we want competence. At the end of the day, in business, it's a performance-based world, and we want to see results and competence, and that's what we would capture in this pillar of ability. And we also want to see something which I think is more intriguing, which is this thing called benevolence. It was interesting at the start of the session this morning, Liz talked about we need more compassion. I think it's a really powerful word, and I think this pillar of benevolence is one that's going to become more and more important in terms of trustworthiness in business. What does benevolence mean? It comes originally from the Latin words bene and volent, which means wishing well, literally wishing well for others. And so what we're looking at with that pillar is going above and beyond customer service or doing a good job, but actually giving and showing compassion to others. And if we do that, the theory says that's one of the pillars that generates trust. The other interesting finding from the theory is that these are equally important, and it's like a multiplier. So trustworthiness equals ability times integrity times benevolence. If you're very able and you've got integrity, but you're cruel, then people are not going to trust you. So it's about being able to demonstrate all three of these and a multiplier effect of working with those. And part of this in a business context, this sort of different mindset is about also these pillars serving a different purpose. I think we've heard a lot about it already today, that there is a shift, I think, in business that's going on from profit as the sole purpose to something that some commentators call the triple bottom line, that we are now going to be delivering profit, but also people outcomes and planet outcomes. And the one organization which I think is really leading the way with this is Unilever. Unilever, led by Paul Polman, its CEO, as CEO since 2009. And when he joined in 2009, he launched something called the Sustainable Living Plan for Unilever. And its aim was to reduce Unilever's environmental footprint, increase its positive social impact, whilst also doubling sales and increasing long-term profitability. And in 2014, after 5 years of that plan, Unilever has reported that its sustainable living brands are now accounting for half of the company's growth and are growing at twice the rate of the other brands. More than 55% of Unilever's agricultural raw materials are being sustainably sourced. CO2 emissions from energy and water have been reduced by 37% and 32%, and they've improved the health and well-being of 397 million people, which is 40% of the way towards their 2020 goal. And in that time, their share price has risen by more than 40%. And I think that's the trick here of really the far-reaching leaders are going to recognize that this isn't an either-or equation, that this is a win-win. And, Paul Polman's quote on this slide, "We are at a turning point in history. A new business model with sustainability at its heart is vital for quality of life around the globe to improve. Only the businesses that grasp this will survive." So Unilever is really putting this type of thinking into practice. It's changing its purpose, and it's looking at the implications of that in terms of leadership behavior and trust. So, how are we doing for time? We're okay. Now, I'm a coach. A lot of this is academic research, and I think that's an important part of delving into a topic. But really what I why I do what I do is because I like to help people get from A to B, and I like to help people change. And so when I look at this, I think, okay, how do you translate this theory into something that's practical and actionable by leaders on a day-to-day basis? And I went to a discussion recently by a guy called David Marquette, who wrote the book called Turn the Ship Around. And he came out with a nice comment, which was something along the lines that bosses think their way to new actions, but leaders act their way to new thinking. So bosses think their way to new actions, leaders act their way to new thinking. And the reason I like that is that it's linked to this word habit. You know, I know this is a shameless sort of copy of Covey's use of that word habit, but I think habits are really powerful because those are the ways that we act towards new thinking. And so this idea that if we can develop new habits, if we can practice behaviors, and if we can work with coaches who are helping us practice these behaviors, then we're sort of subtly rewiring our own thought processes through that activity. So as a pragmatic person, I'm very keen to translate this into actions and behaviors. So these words, ability, integrity, and benevolence, based on the interviews that I've done as part of my research, based on the literature, and based on my experience as a coach, I think there are 9 habits that can be actioned beneath each of these words. So under ability, there's the habit to deliver, and then the habit to help others deliver, which is coaching. And then the habit to do that day in, day out on a consistent basis, and not to go in on Monday and be a different person on Wednesday and Friday. Under the pillar of integrity, honesty. Honesty in deed, in word, and honesty to self. Being open. Probably some of you have come across Brené Brown's work on vulnerability. So being open, at the core of being open is not just telling the truth, but sharing of oneself at a new level and exposing those vulnerabilities. Being humble. So Jim Collins in his level 5 leadership talks about professional will and personal humility. Professional will being like the deliver, we need to be able to do what we say we're going to do, combined with this humility or choosing to be humble. And under benevolence, I think we need more leaders who can evangelize. This is a sort of an interesting word. It means spreading the good news. You know, if we've got Dave Carroll singing his song on YouTube and 15 million people watching it in terms of the bad news about business, we're going to need leaders who are much, much better at spreading the good news and evangelizing around what their businesses do, how they lead, and really taking that out and getting on the front foot in terms of communication. Bravery. I don't mean physical bravery or personal bravery. I mean moral bravery. I think Jessica mentioned this morning that we need to speak up. Moral bravery for me is that ability to speak up on behalf of the wider good and to be prepared to do that in more and more different contexts. And finally, save the best till last, kindness, compassion, kindness. I mean, when I was in Logica, if I'd have used that word, they probably would have struck me off at 48 hours notice. Kindness. I think kindness is going to become a big word in business and a big word for business leaders, because I think without it, this model will not be complete. And I think we will need leaders who know how to be kind as well as doing all the rest of those habits on that chart. Obviously, a lot more that I could say under each of those headings, and a lot more coaching techniques and methods that could be used to help people develop this. But as I said earlier, you as coaches are role models for your clients. They are watching you, they are interpreting your behavior. They might see you just as much as a leader as they are leaders. And therefore, as coaches, as a profession, being able to model this behavior, I think could make a big difference. So what I'd like you to do for the next sort of 5 minutes or so is to look at those habits and to pick the one that you think for you in your coaching is the habit that you could work on that would take your trustworthiness to the next level, the habit that would make the most difference. And I'd like you to work in pairs, again, with the person next to you, to share and coach each other around that model and what it would take for you to go to the next level. And then we'll maybe just get some feedback on that. So if you want to take 5 minutes on that, and then we'll bring you back together. Shh. Shh. Very powerful, that. Shh. Thank you. Yeah, always dangerous to get coaches into topics like this, but yeah, I hope that just gave you a chance to just work with some of those words. Maybe just take 2 or 3 bits of feedback from that. What were people working on there? What were the habits that you wanted to focus on, and what sort of things were you talking about? So, lady here.
Yeah, wasn't so much. We did have a very interesting conversation around many of these, but the word evangelise, we weren't quite sure about. We weren't quite sure how it fitted into benevolence, and not quite sure how it fitted into coaching scenarios.
Yes.
Yes,
and a lady came up and asked me exactly the same question. Yeah, it is a maybe a difficult word, but I think quite a powerful word in a sense that, for me, the reason that it's in the benevolence part of this diagram is that evangelizing is coming from the heart. That it's a heart-based communication around passion, around vision, around maybe some of the resilience that Carol talked about. That evangelizers pour forth that vision just naturally every minute, every hour, every day. And if you think of what's being poured forth towards us every minute, every hour, every day, in terms of the opposite, something's going to need to be a counterforce to that. And that's what I mean by evangelizing. But it's one of the more sort of maybe newer words in that sort of model.
And that there lies the paradox, doesn't it? Because how can you be evangelical when there's many different perceptions and windows on the world that are just as valid as yours?
Yeah, I don't think evangelizing, for me, again, that's the power of that word. I don't think it has a forceful aspect to it in terms of you need to believe what I believe. I think it's just a natural expression of enthusiasm around your truth. Like I can talk to you about trust and I can evangelize about trust. It doesn't mean that I need everybody else to write books on trust or to research trust. But I can be, there are some things I can be evangelical about and other things that I can't. But it's, I don't think it's not that you're commanding that others do anything. Yes, yeah. There's going to be there's going to be some baggage maybe that it will trigger. Anything else? Anything from this side of the room here? So, lady there, yeah. Yes. So the two maybe work together. It takes bravery to evangelize, particularly if you're in a situation where everybody else is not doing that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. Thanks for pointing that out about how these maybe start to interact and, come as a package. Yeah. Being humble and being brave. So it takes what, bravery to be humble, or? Yes. Yeah. Great. So maybe take one more. Anybody else want just picking up. Yeah.
I think there seems to be a common theme about this discussion around evangelising, and as well as being having that self-belief in what we're talking about, and that strength to do it. And again, this perception of we're talking about coaching and the networking there. So what do you do? Well,
Yeah.
but instead of saying what you, through stories and
Yes.
actually having that open passion about what it is we're about.
Yes. So what is your narrative, and what are you evangelizing about? What is your purpose and your vision? Yeah, great, thank you. Did anybody pick coach? Was anybody working on coaching? I expect that to be more of a challenge with leadership audiences. That's a skill that I would expect to be working on this. Yep.
I'm just curious, with your had an opportunity to go back to the organisation you said you were working at before, with
No, is the short answer. Oh, now I've got a picture of a horse on the screen, which is a different story, a different narrative. But no, I haven't been back. But interestingly, I mean, I continued to work with that organization as a coach for many years after I left as an employee. And I did meet many brave leaders in that organization who were practicing some of these skills, and some of them that I've interviewed for this work. You know, I do find there are many hands sort of working on this, but often in quite fragmented ways, rather than it become an institutionalized thing. But I think there are a lot of people at work with this, and as I say, I think our responsibility as coaches is to maybe connect those people up, help them on their way, and start to make this a more permanent fixture in the organizational psyche. So thank you for your time. I am going to finish on a poem, which I know Carol did likewise. So poems must be what we're about today. And yeah, this is a poem from D.H. Lawrence. Oh, we've got to trust one another again in some essentials, not the narrow little bargaining trust that says, I'm for you if you'll be for me, but a bigger trust, a trust of the sun that does not bother about moth and rust. And be, oh be, a sun to me, not a weary, insistent personality, but a sun that shines and goes dark, but shines again and entwines with the sunshine in me. We've got to trust again, so be a sun to me. I hope you will be sons to your clients. Keep taking the red pill.